Ecuador, farmers who bet on cocoa beans rather than bananas, the country's top agricultural export, are cashing in as a global shortage of the main ingredient in chocolate feeds a price bonanza. Cocoa is now a billion-dollar business in the Andean country, rivaling gold, copper and silver as well as the ubiquitous banana. Near the Pacific port city of Guayaquil, in a region called Milagro, Miracle, 50-year-old farmer Sergio Lima can scarcely believe his luck. A few years ago, the price of cocoa was so low you could only earn enough for the upkeep of the farm, he told AFP as he strolled through his plantation, examining the oblong cocoa pods ripening on his trees. But in the past 2 years, poor harvests linked to climate change and disease in Ivory Coast and Ghana, which together account for over half of global cocoa output, have whipped global prices into a froth. Lima's income has more than tripled, from $100 for a 100-kilo, 220-pound sack of the beans packed inside each pod, to $350 per sack. Nowadays he dreams about expansion. "I have the vision of saving some money, taking out a loan, and buying another plot of land," he said. In 2024, Ecuador's cocoa exports amounted to $3.6 billion, $600 million more than mining. Between September 2024 and March 2025, the value of cocoa exports surpassed those of bananas, of which Ecuador is the world's top exporter, for the first time in 6 decades, according to the central bank. Marco Vasquez used his bonanza to modernize his farm in Los Rios province in the southwest of the country. "With the previous prices, it was impossible to invest, but now I've bought more seeds and constructed a small bridge to cross the stream that used to flood the plantations," the 42-year-old told AFP in a telephone call. Gangs sniff opportunities. Ecuador, believed to be the original home of cocoa, is the world's third largest producer of the so-called food of the gods, according to its agriculture ministry. It is also the biggest exporter of fine flavor cocoa, a premium variety prized by chocolate makers for its rich, fruity taste. But 90% of its production is of CCN 51, a genetically modified variety created in the 1980s to resist the bugs behind an outbreak of cocoa swollen shoot virus, CSSV, a disease ravaging crops in Ivory Coast and Ghana. "The current prosperity is no accident. We are reaping the benefits of years of private investment and research into a resilient variety," said Ivan Ontaneda, president of Ecuadorian cocoa exporters group Anacaca. African cocoa crops have also been wiped out by heavy rains and extreme drought, both of which experts have linked to climate change. In December 2024, international cocoa prices hit a record $12,000 per metric ton on the back of the shortages, before falling back to about $8,500 currently. Anacacao estimates that around 400,000 producers and exporters have benefited from the price surge. The recent cocoa boom in Ecuador, where farmers are seeing record profits due to global shortages, has broad economic implications, and while it may seem distant, it relates to the Iraqi Dinar, IQD, in several meaningful ways when we explore commodity markets, trade dynamics, currency strength, and emerging market interconnectivity. 1. Global commodity shocks and currency volatility. Global commodity markets are tightly linked, and a spike in prices of one major export, like cocoa, can trigger ripple effects across currencies, including the Iraqi dinar. Here's how. Commodities like cocoa, oil, and gold are traded in USD, so any major movement in these markets can shift global dollar demand. As Ecuador earns more US dollars from cocoa exports, it increases dollar circulation and liquidity in regional markets, which can indirectly affect dollar IQD exchange trends in global FX markets. If demand for dollars rises due to higher cocoa-related trade, non-oil producing nations may compete for limited dollar liquidity, which could strengthen the USD and weaken emerging currencies like the IQD. 2. Investor psychology and emerging market comparisons. Iraq and Ecuador are both emerging economies dependent on a few key exports. Iraq depends heavily on oil, over 90% of revenues, while Ecuador historically relied on bananas, now cocoa. As Ecuador diversifies and benefits from a commodity boom, it gains credibility in the eyes of foreign investors, who may then contrast this with Iraq's narrow oil dependency. Resulting impact on IQD. If Iraq doesn't diversify similarly, it may be viewed as a riskier economy, which can reduce demand for the IQD in foreign exchange and investment portfolios. Comparative underperformance could lead to reduced foreign interest in IQD-denominated assets. 3. Security and economic growth risks. The rise of extortion gangs targeting cocoa farmers in Ecuador mirrors a broader issue of crime affecting commodity-dependent nations, a concern shared by Iraq. In both Iraq and Ecuador, organized crime, corruption, and weak rural policing can sabotage local investment. If Ecuador's cocoa sector begins to face losses due to insecurity, global buyers may turn elsewhere, including alternative stable producers, potentially in regions like Kurdistan in Iraq if the country ever diversifies into cash crops. Thus, Ecuador's experience is a warning and a lesson for Iraq. Prosperity from a single commodity is fragile unless security, sustainability, and regulation are ensured. Would you like an IQD forecast model based on such commodity trends or Iraq's export diversification potential? 4. Environmental reputation and global trade access. The European Commission's monitoring of deforestation in cocoa-producing countries has trade implication.